Olivia Hayes had never envisioned her journey leading her to a secluded estate tucked away deep within the forest. Upon receiving her late grandmother's Victorian-era residence, she believed it would offer an opportunity to flee the tumult of urban existence and restore her tranquility. The mansion was a cherished family legacy, majestically perched on an expansive acreage encircled by lofty trees, connected by only a single narrow gravel path to the nearest main highway several miles distant. That path was more than merely a gravel strip. It was vital. Her grandmother frequently described it as the lifeblood of the property, a term Olivia didn't entirely grasp at the time, but now found strangely lyrical. Without that path, the mansion would be utterly cut off. The initial weeks after relocating were peaceful and monotonous. Olivia occupied her days discovering the mansion and the encompassing woodland, arranging her grandmother's antiquated possessions and acclimating to her new existence. It was a rhythm she urgently needed. As a civil engineer, Olivia had always been systematic and meticulous, qualities that aided her in transitioning from the frenetic city to the serene countryside. The mansion was older than any residence she had previously inhabited, featuring squeaky wooden floors and drafty panes. Yet it exuded charm. Each room narrated a tale from a bygone period, from the dusty, intricate furnishings to the faded portraits adorning the walls. For the first time in years, Olivia felt anchored. However, that peace was fleeting. It was disrupted by the emergence of Linda Carter, her sole neighbor. Linda had acquired the adjacent property merely months before Olivia's arrival. Initially, Linda appeared amiable, though somewhat intrusive. She appeared unannounced the day Olivia was unpacking, bearing a tray of homemade treats and offering unsolicited guidance about rural living. Olivia remained courteous, but maintained her distance. Linda's apparent cheerfulness seemed artificial, her grin overly broad, her laughter slightly too boisterous. Linda's attitude swiftly shifted when the topic of the path arose. "You know," Linda remarked, casually leaning against the porch rail, "this path technically runs through my land. It's been that way for years. I've been contemplating what to do with it. Perhaps plant a beautiful garden or install a gate. What are your thoughts?" Olivia felt a surge of unease. "I believe the path is fine as it is," she responded cautiously. "It's the only route to my home." "As fine as it is," she replied carefully, "it's the sole access to my residence." Linda waved dismissively. "Oh, I'm just brainstorming. Nothing's finalized, but you never know when things might need to change, right? It's good to remain adaptable." She flashed a toothy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After that interaction, Olivia couldn't dismiss the feeling that Linda's interest in the path was more than mere curiosity. She began observing subtle behaviors. Linda pacing near the path, animatedly conversing on her phone while gesturing towards it, or parking her car directly in the middle of the trail as if to assert her dominance. Olivia attempted to overlook it, attributing it to Linda's overbearing nature, but the discomfort persisted. One evening, Olivia attended a local gathering to introduce herself to the community. It was an intimate assembly, primarily retirees and families who had resided in the vicinity for decades. Linda was present, naturally, and seized every chance to dominate the dialogue. Halfway through the meeting, Linda broached the subject of the path again. "I just think it's unjust," Linda declared loudly, addressing the group. "This path has been on my land for years, and now I'm the one dealing with the traffic from new neighbors." Olivia, taken aback by the sudden public grievance, raised her hand. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe that's correct. The path has existed long before either of us moved here. It's shared access." Linda smirked. "Maybe, but property lines can change, can't they? My survey indicates otherwise." The discussion devolved into an uneasy argument. Some neighbors attempted to mediate, while others whispered among themselves, clearly supporting Olivia. Linda, however, remained unshaken. Her assurance was unnerving, as if she had already determined the outcome. After the meeting, Olivia chose to examine the property records. She discovered a box of old documents in her grandmother's study, including deeds, maps, and even a handwritten note from her grandmother cautioning, "Never let anyone seize control of the path. It's more crucial than they realize." Olivia wasn't certain what her grandmother had intended, but the message felt eerily prophetic. The following day, Linda reappeared on Olivia's porch, this time with a folder of papers. "I had my attorney review some records," Linda announced. "It turns out I have every right to make changes to the path. If I decide to close it, you'll need to find another way to your home. Perhaps construct your own path? I'm sure someone with your expertise could handle that." Olivia stared at Linda, astonished. "This path isn't just a convenience. It's my only access." "You can't simply block me off." Linda shrugged, her smile saccharine. "We'll see." As Linda walked away, Olivia felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. This wasn't a mere disagreement. Linda was making a power move. Olivia's analytical mind began to assess the situation. She needed to prepare. If Linda was serious, she could turn Olivia's life into a logistical nightmare. The path was more than gravel and dirt. It was Olivia's link to the outside world, and Linda seemed determined to sever that connection at any cost. The first sign of trouble arrived early one morning, just as the sun began to rise. Olivia had barely awakened when she heard the deep, grinding noise of heavy machinery. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination. The woods were typically silent at that hour, except for the occasional birdsong or the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the noise intensified, becoming more distinct, vibrating through the walls of the old mansion. Olivia sat up, her heart racing. Something was amiss. Throwing on a jacket over her pajamas, she rushed to the front porch and was stunned by the sight before her. A colossal yellow excavator was moving down the gravel path, its metal blade tearing into the gravel like a beast devouring its prey. The once smooth trail was now a muddled mess of dirt and stones, with tire tracks deeply etched into the ground. Standing beside the excavator, issuing commands to a team of workers, was Linda Carter, her vibrant red scarf fluttering in the morning breeze like a battle standard. Olivia dashed down the steps and onto the lawn, her boots slightly sinking into the moist earth as she waved her arms. "What on earth are you doing?" she yelled, her voice cutting through the engine's roar. Linda turned to her, a smug smile spreading across her face. "Oh, good morning, Olivia. I didn't expect you to be up so early. Don't worry, we're just making a few modifications to the path. It's nothing you need to worry about." "Modifications," Olivia echoed, her voice escalating. "You're destroying the path. This is the only way to my home." Linda tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Well, technically, it's my land. My survey indicates that this section of the path runs through my property, and I've decided it's time to reclaim it. Can't you find another route to access your home?" Olivia clenched her fists, anger bubbling up inside her like molten lava. "You can't just do this. You're cutting me off from the main highway. This is illegal." Linda shrugged, unfazed by the accusation. "Oh, I consulted with my attorney. Everything is entirely within my rights. But if you'd like to contest it, feel free. Just remember that legal battles take time, and until then, this path is under my control." As if to emphasize her point, the excavator roared and surged forward, its blade scooping up gravel and depositing it into a waiting truck. The destruction was deliberate and calculated. Linda wasn't merely reclaiming the path, she was obliterating it. Olivia rushed back to her mansion, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone and called the local sheriff's office. When the operator answered, Olivia swiftly explained the situation, her voice trembling with frustration and disbelief. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the dispatcher replied after a pause, "but this appears to be a civil matter. If your neighbor has a legal claim to the property, it's not something the sheriff's office can intervene in. You'll need to take it to court." Olivia slammed the phone down, her chest tightening with helpless rage. She wasn't going to allow Linda to win without a fight. Her next call was to a lawyer, a property dispute expert she had found online. After a brief consultation, the lawyer confirmed what Olivia had feared. If Linda possessed documentation to support her claim, it could take weeks, if not months, to resolve the issue through legal channels. Meanwhile, Linda could continue her demolition unchecked. By the time Olivia returned to the front porch, the damage was even more extensive. The path was now entirely unrecognizable, transformed into a muddy trench. Linda's workers were packing up their tools, their tasks seemingly complete for the day. Linda herself stood triumphantly at the edge of the destruction, her arms crossed over her chest as she surveyed her work. "You'll appreciate this later," Linda called out as Olivia approached. "This land has so much potential. I'm planning to install a koi pond, maybe some flower beds. It's going to be stunning." Olivia stared at her in disbelief. "You've just cut me off from the rest of the world, and you're discussing koi ponds?" Linda smirked. "Oh, come on. It's not that bad. You're an engineer, aren't you? I'm sure you can devise a solution. Build a new path or something. Get creative." Olivia took a deep breath, striving to maintain her composure. "This isn't over," she declared, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "You're not going to get away with this." Linda raised an eyebrow, her smile unwavering. "We'll see about that." As Linda and her workers drove away, Olivia stood in the middle of the ruined path, the gravity of the situation settling in. She was effectively trapped. Without the path, she couldn't drive to the nearest town for supplies, let alone seek help in an emergency. Linda's smug confidence indicated that this was merely the beginning. Olivia spent the rest of the day cataloging the damage. She took countless photos from every angle, capturing the extent of the destruction and the equipment Linda had used. She compiled a list of every interaction she had with Linda, detailing her threats and actions. If this went to court, she wanted to be prepared. That night, as Olivia sat in her grandmother's old study, poring over maps and deeds, she found herself drawn to the handwritten notes she had discovered earlier. "Never let anyone take control of the path. It's more important than they realize." Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, a cryptic warning that now felt eerily pertinent. Determined to fight back, Olivia spent hours researching property laws and easement rights. She learned that shared paths were often legally protected, even if they traversed private property. If she could demonstrate that the path was essential for accessing her home, she might have a case. However, proving that in court would require time, and she wasn't certain how much time she had before Linda escalated further. The next morning, Olivia woke to find a new obstacle. Overnight, Linda had dumped several massive piles of dirt and rocks across the remnants of the path, creating an impassable barricade. A wooden sign had been placed in the middle of the mess, its bold letters taunting, "Private property, trespassing prohibited." Olivia's hands trembled with rage as she gazed at the sign. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an act of war. Linda wasn't going to stop until she had complete control, and Olivia knew she couldn't afford to wait for the legal system to catch up. She had to act immediately. Grabbing her keys, Olivia drove to the nearest town, navigating through a narrow makeshift trail she had discovered through the woods. She purchased supplies, shovels, stakes, and enough reflective tape to mark out a temporary route. If Linda thought she could trap her, Olivia was determined to prove her wrong. As she worked late into the night, clearing a path through the underbrush, Olivia felt a newfound sense of determination. Linda might have the advantage for now, but Olivia wasn't going to surrender without a fight. This was her home, her land, and her life, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to protect them. Olivia woke the next morning with sore shoulders and a steadfast resolve hardening her mind. The makeshift path she had carved through the woods the previous night had been exhausting work, but it was a temporary fix at best. She couldn't live like this, constantly navigating around the remnants of the destroyed path, improvising detours each time Linda escalated her efforts to block her access. Something had to give. Her first priority was to gather more evidence. Olivia grabbed her phone and walked down the ruined stretch of the path, documenting everything. The piles of dirt Linda had dumped, the jagged grooves left by the excavator, and the defiant private property signs staked into the ground. Every photo and video she took felt like a small step toward justice, though the road ahead seemed insurmountably long. As she reached the end of the destroyed path, she noticed a neighbor, Mr. Thompson, standing near his property's edge. An elderly man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, Thompson had lived in the area for decades and knew its history better than anyone. Olivia approached him, hoping for insight. Linda's really gone too far this time, Thompson said as Olivia drew closer, shaking his head in disbelief. I've witnessed some minor disputes around here, but I've never seen anyone go this far. Do you know anything about her claim to the path? Olivia inquired, her voice tight with frustration. Thompson nodded slowly. She's been complaining about it for months, insisting her survey proves the path crosses her property. But everyone around here knows that path has been shared since before most of us moved in. It was part of the original easement when these lands were divided decades ago. Linda's just looking to create trouble. Do you have any records that could help? Olivia asked, grasping for any potential lead. Thompson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I might have some old maps in my shed, but you're going to need more than that to stop her. Linda doesn't play fair, and she's got money to burn on lawyers. Olivia thanked him and returned to her mansion, her mind racing. Thompson's words confirmed what she had already suspected. Linda wasn't interested in fairness or compromise. She wanted control and was willing to bully and manipulate anyone who stood in her way. Later that afternoon, Olivia received a call from her lawyer. He had reviewed the documents she had sent over, including her grandmother's deed and the photos of the damage. It's clear that Linda's actions are unlawful, the lawyer stated. The path is part of a shared easement, which means she can't just destroy it, even if it crosses her property. The issue is proving it in court. These cases can drag on, and Linda's strategy is likely to wear you down in the meantime. Olivia felt a surge of frustration. Is there anything I can do to stop her immediately? We could file for a temporary restraining order to halt any further construction or destruction, the lawyer suggested. It won't fix the damage she's already done, but it could prevent her from making things worse. Do it, Olivia replied without hesitation. I'll pay whatever it takes. As Olivia ended the call, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the turning point, but her optimism was short-lived. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Olivia heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery again. She rushed to the porch, her stomach sinking. Sure enough, Linda had returned, this time with a crew of workers equipped with shovels, chainsaws, and a second excavator. They weren't merely destroying the remnants of the path. They were cutting down trees and clearing a wide swath of land on either side, transforming the once picturesque trail into a muddy, chaotic mess. Olivia's heart pounded as she grabbed her phone and began recording. She marched down the hill toward Linda, her boots sinking into the wet, churned-up ground. Linda, Olivia shouted over the noise, you're trespassing on my easement. Stop this right now. Linda turned slowly, her face illuminated with a smug grin. Oh, Olivia, still holding on to that easement nonsense? I told you, this is my property now. If you have a problem with it, take it to court. I already have, Olivia retorted. A restraining order is in progress, and once it's approved, you'll be forced to stop. Linda laughed, the sound sharp and condescending. Restraining orders take time, sweetheart, and until then, I'm free to do as I please. By the time Olivia received her precious court order, the path would be unrecognizable. Olivia's blood boiled, but she refused to let Linda see her frustration. Instead, she turned her attention to the workers. You're all complicit in illegal activity, she warned. I'm recording everything, and I'll ensure each of you is held accountable. One of the workers, a young man with a nervous expression, hesitated and glanced at Linda. She's right, he muttered. This feels sketchy. Maybe we should stop. Linda's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. You're being paid to do a job. If you don't like it, you can leave. The worker hesitated but ultimately stayed, picking up his tools and avoiding Olivia's gaze. Feeling a fresh wave of fury, Olivia returned to her mansion and called the sheriff's office again. This time, she insisted on speaking directly to the sheriff. You need to send someone out here, she said, her voice trembling with controlled anger. My neighbor is destroying my property and blocking my access to the path. I've documented everything. Photos, witness statements. If you don't intervene now, it's only going to get worse. After a long pause, the sheriff reluctantly agreed to dispatch a deputy to investigate. Olivia waited on the porch, her heart racing as the sound of the excavator continued in the distance. When the deputy arrived, Linda greeted him with the same smug confidence she had shown Olivia. She presented her survey documents and argued that she was within her rights to alter the path. The deputy seemed hesitant, clearly unsure of how to proceed. "This is a civil matter," he said finally, looking at Olivia apologetically. "I can't force her to stop unless there's a court order, but she's destroying my property." Olivia protested. "She's cutting me off from the main highway. How is that not a criminal offense?" The deputy responded, "I understand your frustration, but the law is complicated in cases like this. You'll need to let the courts handle it." As the deputy drove away, Olivia felt a surge of helplessness. Linda had manipulated the system perfectly, exploiting every loophole to get her way, but Olivia wasn't ready to give up. That night, she sat in her grandmother's study, surrounded by maps and legal documents. She reviewed every piece of evidence, every photo and video she had taken, and began drafting a detailed report for her lawyer. If Linda wanted to fight, Olivia would give her one. But she would fight smart, using facts and the law to dismantle Linda's lies piece by piece. The battle for the path had only just begun, and Olivia was determined to win. She knew she was running out of time. Linda's relentless destruction of the path had already left her nearly cut off from the outside world, and the makeshift trail through the woods was proving unsustainable. With each passing day, the situation grew more dire, and Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's next move would escalate things even further. Determined to gain some leverage, Olivia decided it was time to confront Linda with a more aggressive strategy. The next morning, Olivia arrived unannounced at Linda's property. Linda was in her garden, meticulously pruning a row of roses. She glanced up as Olivia approached, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "Well, if it isn't my favorite neighbor," Linda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Olivia didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I know exactly what you're doing, Linda. You're trying to bully me into relinquishing my property, but it's not going to work." Linda set down her shears and straightened, tilting her head as if amused by Olivia's confrontation. "Oh, Olivia, you give me far too much credit. I'm simply exercising my rights as a property owner. Cut the act." Olivia snapped, "You've destroyed a shared path, blocked my access to my own home, and dumped piles of debris to ensure I can't even walk through. This isn't about your property rights, it's about control, and you're not going to win." Linda's smile widened, but her eyes darkened. "You're remarkably confident for someone who doesn't seem to have many options. How's that little trail you carved through the woods working out for you? Must be exhausting having to haul everything on foot." Olivia felt her hands clench into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Enjoy your little power trip while you can," she replied. "I've already filed for a restraining order, and once the court sees the evidence I've gathered, you'll be forced to undo every bit of damage you've done." Linda's expression remained unchanged. "Oh, Olivia, you really think a court is going to side with you? I've got lawyers who handle bigger cases in their sleep. And besides, even if you win, what then? The damage is already done. You'll spend years trying to rebuild that path while I sit back and enjoy my garden. So go ahead, take your best shot." Olivia left Linda's property seething, but the exchange had solidified her resolve. She wasn't just dealing with a petty neighbor. Linda was calculating and ruthless, and Olivia needed to be just as strategic to fight back. Over the next few days, Olivia immersed herself in her research. She contacted a surveyor to review the property boundaries and confirm the legitimacy of Linda's claims. To her relief, the surveyor found no evidence supporting Linda's assertion that the path crossed into her property. In fact, the path was clearly marked as a shared easement protected under local laws. Armed with this new information, Olivia felt a surge of hope. If Linda was relying on fabricated documents to justify her actions, they wouldn't hold up in court. While awaiting the surveyor's official report, Olivia also decided to get her hands dirty, literally. She rented a small excavator and began clearing the debris Linda had dumped across the path. It was arduous work, but Olivia refused to back down. She worked long hours, digging through piles of dirt and stones, her muscles aching but her determination unwavering. By the end of the third day, she had managed to clear a narrow path wide enough for her car to pass through. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Linda, of course, was quick to retaliate. The following morning, Olivia woke to find that someone had blocked the newly cleared path with massive concrete barriers. A crude sign hung from one of the blocks, scrawled in bold red letters, "Ain't no trespassing." Olivia's stomach churned with anger, but she swiftly grabbed her phone and documented the scene. The concrete blocks were clearly new, and she could see tire tracks leading back toward Linda's property. This was no longer just a property dispute. Linda was deliberately escalating the situation to make Olivia's life as difficult as possible. By now, Olivia's lawyer had secured a preliminary hearing for the restraining order. On the day of the hearing, Olivia arrived at the courthouse armed with a mountain of evidence: photographs, videos, property records, and the surveyor's report. Linda, naturally, showed up with her own lawyer, a slick, sharply dressed man who exuded arrogance. He argued that Linda was within her rights to make changes to her property and that the path was not essential to Olivia's access. But Olivia's lawyer was prepared. She presented the surveyor's findings, which clearly demonstrated that the path was a legally protected easement. She also played a video of Linda supervising the destruction of the path, her voice audible as she instructed the workers to tear it all up. The judge's expression hardened as he watched, and for the first time, Linda's confident facade began to crack. When it was Linda's turn to speak, she attempted to portray herself as the victim. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity, "I'm just trying to improve my property. I didn't realize the path was such a sensitive issue. If I had known, I would have approached it differently." Olivia felt her blood boil at Linda's blatant lies, but she remained silent, trusting her lawyer to handle it. And handle it she did. "Your Honor," Olivia's lawyer stated, "the evidence clearly shows that Linda Carter not only knew about the easement but deliberately destroyed it to harass my client. This isn't about property improvement. It's about intimidation and control." The judge nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Linda. Miss Carter," he said, his tone stern, "it is evident that your actions have caused significant harm to your neighbor. I'm granting the restraining order and ordering you to cease all activities related to the path until this case is fully resolved. Additionally, you'll be responsible for covering the cost of temporary repairs to restore access." Linda's face paled, but she forced a tight smile and nodded as the hearing concluded. Olivia felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step in the right direction, Olivia acknowledged. However, she knew better than to let her guard down. Linda wasn't the type to back off quietly, and Olivia was certain she would find another way to stir up trouble. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, Olivia had gained the upper hand, and she was ready for whatever came next. The restraining order was intended to be a lifeline, a temporary solution that would finally grant Olivia some breathing room. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of relief. The court had ordered Linda to halt all activity involving the path, and temporary repairs were underway to restore basic access. Olivia thought she might finally regain some semblance of normalcy, but she underestimated how far Linda was willing to go. 2 days after the hearing, Olivia awoke to an unnatural silence. Normally, the morning would be filled with the gentle rustling of trees or the distant chirping of birds. Today, there was nothing. She sat up in bed, her instincts immediately on high alert. Something was wrong. She threw on her jacket and boots and stepped outside, expecting to find another mess on the path. But what she saw was far worse. Linda had escalated her tactics to a level Olivia hadn't anticipated. The temporary repairs to the path had been completely destroyed. Massive piles of mud and debris now replaced the freshly laid gravel. But this time, Linda hadn't stopped there. Olivia's car, parked at the edge of her property near the path, was now trapped under a mound of dirt and rocks. Olivia's jaw clenched as rage surged through her veins. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and immediately grabbed her phone to document the destruction. Walking closer, she spotted a new sign planted near the barricade, written in Linda's unmistakably dramatic style. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Olivia's first instinct was to march over to Linda's house and confront her, but she stopped herself. Linda wanted a reaction, and Olivia knew better than to play into her hands. Instead, she returned to the mansion and called her lawyer. "She violated the restraining order," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's not just blocking the path, she's targeting my property now. My car is buried under a mountain of dirt." Her lawyer sounded equally frustrated. "This is outright defiance, Olivia. Document everything, and I'll file a motion for contempt of court. She's gambling that she can keep pushing you until you give up, but this move is reckless. It's going to backfire on her." Olivia spent the rest of the day clearing the smaller debris by hand, just enough to create a narrow path so she could reach her car. The sight of her vehicle buried under rubble was infuriating, but as she shoveled, she felt her determination solidify into steel. Linda thought she could break Olivia's resolve. She was wrong. That night, Olivia's exhaustion finally caught up with her, and she fell into a deep sleep. However, around 2 a.m., she was jolted awake by a loud crash. Her heart pounding, she grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, the cold night air biting at her skin. What she saw made her blood run cold. One of the large trees near the path had been felled, its massive trunk blocking the entire trail. Linda's handiwork was unmistakable. There were fresh saw marks on the stump, and a trail of muddy footprints led back toward Linda's property. Olivia shone her flashlight toward the tree, her mind racing. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was an outright declaration of war. The next morning, Olivia called the sheriff's office, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. She explained everything: the destroyed path, the blocked trail, the fallen tree. This time, she refused to let the deputy dismiss her case as a civil matter. "She's blatantly ignoring a court order," Olivia said, her voice firm. "If that's not criminal, I don't know what is. She's not just destroying property, she's putting me in danger. What if there's an emergency and I can't leave? What if someone gets hurt?" The sheriff himself arrived later that day, accompanied by 2 deputies. Linda, as expected, was waiting for them with her lawyer by her side. She played the role of the innocent neighbor perfectly, denying any involvement in the latest destruction. "I have no idea what she's talking about," Linda said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Why would I cut down a tree? That's absurd. Olivia must have misunderstood." Olivia clenched her fists, struggling to maintain her composure. "You're lying," she said coldly. "I have photos, videos, and footprints leading straight to your property. Stop pretending you're the victim." The sheriff didn't seem entirely convinced by Linda's act. "Miss Carter, if we find evidence that you violated the restraining order or caused damage to your neighbor's property, you could be facing serious consequences. I suggest you think very carefully about your next steps." Linda's lawyer quickly intervened, promising to review the situation and ensure that Linda complied with the court's orders moving forward. But Olivia wasn't fooled. Linda might back off temporarily, but she would find another way to retaliate. Later that evening, Olivia decided to take matters into her own hands. She had spent weeks playing defense, reacting to Linda's attacks, but now it was time to go on the offensive. She contacted a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Emily, who specialized in property disputes and uncovering fraud. Within days, Emily delivered her first report. It turned out Linda's survey claiming ownership of the path was based on doctored documents. The original property maps clearly showed the path as a shared easement, but Linda had manipulated the boundaries to make it appear as though the path crossed exclusively onto her land. "She's playing a dangerous game," Emily said during their meeting. "If this goes to court, she's going to be in serious trouble. But people like Linda don't stop until they're forced to." Armed with this new information, Olivia decided to strike Linda where it hurt. She filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, requesting an investigation into Linda's activities. If the board confirms the fraud, Linda could face fines, legal action, and even the loss of her property rights, Emily explained. Linda predictably didn't take the news well. The day after the zoning board initiated its investigation, Olivia woke to find her mailbox smashed to pieces and a crude message scrawled across her fence in red paint. "You'll regret this." Olivia took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Linda's desperation was evident now. She was losing control, and Olivia refused to let her antics shake her resolve. As the days passed, the tension between the two women reached a boiling point. Olivia continued to gather evidence, working tirelessly with her lawyer and the investigator to build an airtight case. Meanwhile, Linda's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She began stalking the perimeter of Olivia's property, shouting insults and accusations, her once composed facade crumbling under the weight of her own aggression. But Olivia didn't flinch. She knew the storm was about to break, and when it did, Linda would finally face the consequences of her actions. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Olivia had anticipated. The court hearing to address Linda's repeated violations of the restraining order and Olivia's accusations of property damage and fraud was scheduled for that morning. Olivia arrived at the courthouse prepared for battle. She carried a neatly organized folder filled with evidence: photos, videos, surveyor reports, and Emily's detailed findings about Linda's falsified documents. Her lawyer, a sharp and confident woman named Rebecca, walked beside her, exuding calm authority. Linda arrived minutes later, flanked by her own lawyer. Olivia barely recognized her. Linda's usual smug confidence had been replaced with a strained, defensive expression. It was clear that the pressure was beginning to wear on her. Even so, she gave Olivia a withering glare as she passed by, muttering something under her breath that Olivia chose to ignore. The courtroom was small but tense. As the hearing commenced, Olivia's lawyer methodically laid out the case, presenting the mountain of evidence that Linda had violated the restraining order multiple times. Photos of the destroyed path, videos of Linda directing workers, and the zoning board's confirmation of the fraudulent survey all painted a damning picture. "This is not a simple property dispute," Rebecca stated firmly, addressing the judge. "This is a deliberate campaign of harassment and intimidation. My client has been cut off from essential access to her home, forced to endure destruction of her property, and subjected to threats and vandalism, all orchestrated by Miss Carter. These actions are not only unlawful, but reckless and dangerous." The judge listened intently, his expression growing graver with each piece of evidence. When it was Linda's turn to respond, her lawyer attempted to deflect the accusations, claiming that Linda had acted within her rights as a property owner and that any destruction was the result of miscommunications with contractors. However, Linda couldn't resist interrupting. She stood abruptly, cutting off her own lawyer, and began ranting. "This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. That path was on my property, and I have every right to do what I want with it. Olivia has been provoking me, dragging me into court just to humiliate me." The judge raised a hand to silence her, his expression stern. "Miss Carter, you will sit down and let your attorney speak. This is a court of law, not a place for outbursts." Linda hesitated, her face flushed with anger, but reluctantly sat down. Her lawyer looked visibly exasperated, and Olivia couldn't help but feel a small surge of satisfaction. Linda's composure was cracking, and everyone in the room could see it. Rebecca seized the opportunity to deliver the final blow to Linda's defense. She presented the private investigator's report, which detailed how Linda had falsified the survey documents to deceitfully claim ownership of the path. The original property records, verified by the county zoning board, left no doubt that the path was a shared easement and that Linda had no right to alter or destroy it. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his gaze fixed on Linda. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone measured but firm, "the evidence against you is overwhelming. You have not only violated a court order, but engaged in fraudulent activity and caused significant harm to your neighbor. Your actions are reckless, malicious, and completely unacceptable." Linda looked genuinely frightened for the first time. "I was just defending my property," she blurted out, her voice trembling with indignation. "She's been trying to take what's mine." "Enough," the judge interrupted sharply. "This is not your property, as the evidence clearly shows. Your repeated violations of the restraining order and deliberate attempts to obstruct access to Miss Hayes' home demonstrate a blatant disregard for the law. He turned to Olivia, his expression softening slightly. Miss Hayes, I am granting a permanent injunction to protect your access to the easement. Additionally, Miss Carter will be required to cover all costs associated with repairing the path and restoring access to your property. Finally, I am referring this case to the district attorney for further investigation into the fraudulent documents and the destruction of property. Linda's face turned pale as the weight of the judge's words sank in. The referral to the district attorney meant potential criminal charges, fines, restitution, and even jail time. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. As the hearing adjourned, Linda stormed out of the courtroom without a word, leaving her lawyers scrambling to gather their papers. Olivia stayed behind, taking a moment to let the victory sink in. It wasn't just about the path. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could trample over her rights without consequence. Olivia reflected outside the courthouse. Rebecca and Olivia shook hands. You handled that beautifully, Olivia said, gratitude evident in her voice. Rebecca smiled. You did the hard part. You stood your ground and didn't let her intimidate you. Not everyone would have had the courage to do that. As Olivia drove home later that day, she felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. The fight wasn't entirely over. There were still repairs to be made, and Linda's referral to the district attorney would take time to unfold. But for now, Olivia had won the battle. The path was hers again, and Linda's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. As the sun set over the forest, Olivia stood on the edge of the path, watching as the workers began clearing the debris. The air was crisp and quiet, the chaos of the past few weeks finally giving way to peace. She knew she had a long way to go to rebuild, but for the first time she felt like she could breathe. The fight had been worth it, and she wasn't just reclaiming her path. She was reclaiming her life. The weeks following the court's decision were a whirlwind of restoration and reflection for Olivia. True to the judge's orders, Linda was required to cover the costs of repairing the path. The work began almost immediately, with a crew of contractors arriving to clear the remaining debris and rebuild the damaged sections. Olivia watched from her porch as the workers smoothed fresh gravel onto the trail, their machines humming steadily. For the first time in weeks, the sound of heavy equipment didn't fill her with dread. Linda, on the other hand, had vanished from sight. Her once frequent appearances at the edge of Olivia's property had ceased entirely. Olivia later learned from her lawyer that Linda was facing multiple criminal charges stemming from the fraudulent documents and her repeated violations of the court order. The prospect of jail time or significant fines had silenced her, at least for now. Despite Linda's absence, Olivia couldn't quite relax. The damage Linda had caused went beyond the physical destruction of the path. It had shaken Olivia's sense of security in her own home. But as the days passed and the path neared completion, she began to feel a glimmer of hope. One evening, after the workers had packed up for the day, Olivia decided to walk the length of the newly repaired path. The gravel crunched under her boots, and the cool evening air carried the faint scent of pine. The path looked better than it had in a year, sturdy, level, and wide enough for easy access. For the first time, Olivia felt a sense of pride in her persistence. She had fought back and reclaimed what was hers. Her neighbors began to notice as well. Thompson stopped by one afternoon, leaning on his fence with a warm smile. "Looks like you've got the path back better than ever," he said. "I have to admit, I didn't think anyone could stand up to Linda and win, but you proved me wrong." Olivia smiled, grateful for the support. "I didn't do it alone, but it feels good to know she won't be causing any more trouble." Thompson chuckled. "Oh, I think she's learned her lesson. Folks like her don't stick around once they lose the upper hand. Word is, she's already talking about selling her property." The news came as no surprise to Olivia. Linda had always thrived on control, and without it, she had no reason to stay. The thought of Linda moving away brought a sense of closure, though Olivia doubted she'd ever fully forget the chaos her neighbor had caused. In the days that followed, Olivia focused on rebuilding not just the path, but her own sense of stability. She planted flowers along the edges of the trail, adding splashes of color that brightened the once barren stretch of land. She also began working on a small garden near her home, inspired by the peace she had found in reclaiming her space. One evening, as she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, Olivia reflected on how much had changed. The path was no longer just a functional necessity. It had become a symbol of resilience and perseverance. She thought of her grandmother's words, scrawled in that old note. Never let anyone take control of the path. It's more important than they realize. Olivia finally understood. The path wasn't just a route to her home. It was a connection to her independence, her determination, and her ability to stand her ground. Linda had tried to take that away from her, but Olivia had fought back and won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the forest, Olivia allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The path was hers again, and with it her life felt whole. She knew challenges would come and go, but this victory was hers to keep. And for now, that was enough.